wonder a year from now, how much what we've covered you'll actually remember. Let's get to work. Screen. Let's go here. Let's go there. Morning, guys. How's everybody doing? Good, bad, indifferent? Coolio. So, okay. What chapter did I just draw? Yesterday we covered this. What we did, of course, is we focused on this piece here. And notice I'm using no nouns in my sentences. So you should be able to decorate all the pieces of information in, sort of by-way review. So instead of giving you like a daily 5-question quiz or something like that would just be annoying, I can annoy you even more by going online at 8 o'clock in the morning and saying, hey, what can you tell me about these cartoons? Maybe, what are our targets over here? Question mark, targets. R-G-E-T-S.
Would that be the effector muscles?
Okay, fantastic. Well, for here, which muscles would we be talking about, Ryan?
For the top one, right?
Correct.
Somatic. So.
Unfortunately, Ryan, that is an incorrect answer.
Like a skeletal muscle?
Oh, even worse. Take a look at what the lines are telling you. What is this? Why do I have 2 here? Why do I have these spaces where they're at? What does that mean?
Is that an interneuron area? No.
No. Think different chapter. That's why I asked what chapter, what did I review here by drawing this one cartoon?
I don't know.
Yeah. Somebody
Wait,
say
aren't the spaces where the ganglion is?
Fantastic. So ganglion for this one and ganglion for this one. The grouping of ganglions for this versus this have 2 different names. What are they? Nicole, you were brave a moment ago. You want to be brave again?
Well, if I'm going to be brave, I was going to hint at maybe like the targets. One of them like glands or like cardiac.
Cool, yes, yes. Cool,
And
fantastic.
muscle.
Multiple tiny little circles, which are glands. Remember, your heart in this class is now a box with 4 lines going through it and then a smooth muscle. Okay, and this is how you know you're inside chapter 15, because these are all the effector targets for the autonomic nervous system. But let's get back to this question over here before we move forward. I asked, what is the collective name for the ganglia for the parasympathetic and sympathetic components of the autonomic nervous system? Who remembers what they were named? It's like, oh, I have no fucking clue. At 8:05 in the morning. That's good. Somebody's opening up a textbook. Woo! It's always reinforcing to see this. Okay, you're looking for the figure where you can see this sympathetic trunk ganglia. And that grouping is called something. What is that grouping called? Stephanie, have any ideas for us? Pull out the whole class here. Go random. Oops, I'm drawing there. I didn't want to draw. Random. Nope. Caleb, you're just waiting for the answer, aren't you? You're like, I have no fucking clue.
I was on mute. Yeah, I'm waiting for the answer. Yeah.
Kick ass.
Hope someone has it because I don't.
How dare you expect me to think at 8:06 in the morning? Amy, you're getting closer. I can tell by your furrowed brow.
I don't have the book super close. So.
You don't? Okay, cool. So Amy, which system are you looking at? Sympathetic or parasympathetic?
Sympathetic.
Fantastic. So look at the lower right-hand side of the page. You'll see there's a bracket down by the terminal end of the spinal cord. What grouping do you see there?
Inferior mesenteric.
Okay, so that is a ganglion. What about the bracket in black that's underneath it, and there's a name next to it? What is that name?
Oh, prevertebral ganglion.
So prevertebral ganglion. Now apply that to the cartoon here. Which one would it go to? Would it literally go to A or would it go to B?
All right, let me think. I'm going to say A.
Correct. You are correct. And it's because B is parasympathetic, and that means B has a longer B-type fiber, making that the parasympathetic nervous system. So our prevertebral would be here. Turn the page. And now after prevertebral, what is the name of the ganglia for the parasympathetic autonomic nervous system?
Would it be too much to hope that it's postvertebral?
It would be way too much. Look at the top of the page. There's a bracket on the top of the ganglia when you're looking at the parasympathetic cranial sacral divisions. The cranial group has a bracket.
Terminal ganglia?
Fantastic. Terminal ganglia. Look at that. She's like, I am the champion today. I'm sorry?
And then when you think about it, it makes so much sense.
It does, doesn't it?
Right?
Exactly. Now,
So-
so first things first, remember what we did here is we went all the way back to chapter 15, because you guys have long since forgotten about chapter 15. And I drew the basic patterning for you here, you know, to a a preganglionic and a postganglionic neuron. We reiterated that the B-type fibers are myelinated, the C-type fibers are not. And then we asked, what are the targets? The question you weren't expecting this morning is, how do we group the names of each of those ganglia? So here's like a differentiation point. B student gets prevertebral and terminal. A student knows the names of each of the ganglion inside prevertebral and terminal. Okay? It's like, these days I'm looking for a B. I don't give a fuck. I'm just trying to get through the week. I just swore it. 8:10 in the morning. Exactly. It's okay. My cats, they've been hearing me swear all morning long, so it's okay. Cool. So now let's get back to.
So real quick, Professor.
Yeah.
That's not trunk ganglia because otherwise you would have drawn the trunk going through.
No. So the actual ganglia themselves are exiting from the sympathetic trunk. You'll notice, take a look at the solid line versus the hashed line, Caleb. You'll see the solid line is still that B-type fiber that exited the sympathetic trunk ganglia.
Right. Okay.
Okay? Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I had you, like your take-home quiz is probably going to be draw the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. For the sympathetic, obviously, I need to see the blue lines exiting the thoracic lumbar portion of the spinal column, creating that sympathetic trunk ganglia. But if I tell you to identify the components of the prevertebral ganglia, you would draw that even further away from the sympathetic trunk ganglia. Does that help?
I don't know. I'm a little confused.
Okay, so put your finger on the spinal cord inside your textbook. Put your finger on the spinal cord.
I thought you were saying mine. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, do that. There'll be a fucking pretzel on the floor in a second.
All right. Yep, it's there.
Okay, now move to your right, so you're on the sympathetic trunk ganglia.
Yep.
Okay, now move further to your right, And now you're actually in the prevertebral ganglia, and you'll notice that they're ascending from the bracket that says prevertebral ganglia. With me?
Yeah, I see that.
Okay, so now here's what you need to be able to do, okay? When you're thinking about how this actually works, if you were drawing this out, it would be ball and stick, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Ball and stick would be blue lines exiting out from the thoracic and lumbar portion of the spinal column, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, they'd be traveling into that sympathetic trunk ganglia that now creates a U-like shape around the entire spinal cord. With me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, what the fuck are you talking? No, literally, trace the sympathetic trunk ganglia all the way around the spine.
I'm just
Trace
caught
the
up
U.
because, so I thought that the prevertebral ganglia was different from the trunk ganglia.
It is.
So, but how do we know that that was prevertebral ganglia and not?
I asked, what is the grouping that's found outside
outside of the trunk?
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Okay, cool. Now, if I asked a specific question about the trunk ganglia, you'd see if you went ascending up the sympathetic trunk ganglia, there are a group of ganglia up there, right? Yes, no, maybe? Superior?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I could ask questions about that, but you'll notice I've spent absolutely no time on those at all.
Okay.
I've spent
Yeah,
all
I
my
guess I didn't
time.
know the exact wording of the question.
Exactly.
Now I get it.
Okay, cool, fantastic. So let's
Thank
get down here to the lower part, where yesterday we spent our entire morning looking at were primary, secondary, and tertiary neurons. And that's a horrible way to put this, right? Because that's going to confuse the shit out of you. I want to make sure that from this moment forward, we're always thinking about first order, second order, and third order neurons. Remember, our first order neuron is our primary somatosensory neuron. We have a second order neuron that's going to synapse at the thalamus with our third order neuron. And notice here, at some point in time, decussation occurred between that first order and second order neuron, right? And last night, when you probably should have been reading and you weren't, you were supposed to study what are the different major somatosensory tracts that ascended. I won't quiz you on those right now, but you should be ready for one for tomorrow, as in like, hey, good morning. Somebody tell me where the spinal thalamic tracts are traveling to, okay? But today, what we're gonna focus on, how now did the information travel from our post-central gyrus, and then we end up initiating a pre-central gyrus signal that descends through our upper motor neuron down to our lower motor neuron. And now, Ryan, this is when you activate those somatic motor cells. Okay? With me? So this morning, all we're going to be focusing on is primarily.
Kinda, yeah. I'm a little lost, but I'm trying to keep up.
Okay. So Ryan, are you angry enough to flip me off?
No, I'm pretty relaxed right now.
Oh shit.
Sorry.
Caleb, are you angry enough to flip me off?
No, not at all.
Oh. Amy! Oh, Amy! Kick ass! Fantastic. Okay, so this is being recorded. Fantastic. Now I'm going to blackmail you. I'm joking. Okay, cool. So now the idea is this. You voluntarily made the decision. Notice your textbook doesn't ever entertain how that actually happened. It just simply says you made the decision to execute a somatic motor output. And because you made the decision to execute a somatic motor output, you use an upper motor neuron, U, okay, to activate a lower motor neuron, L. And that lower motor neuron will then exocytose acetylcholine at that neuromuscular junction we studied way back inside chapter 10 to now actually activate the musculature. So she should go, dude, go play in traffic, man. Okay. No. Okay, cool. So that's what we're going to be working on today. There are two major sets of voluntary tracts that are called pyramidal and non-pyramidal. Generally speaking, they're separated inside your textbook. probably more for teaching purposes than anything else. In reality, they're actually intertwined in their functional responsibilities. And then there's a series of sort of unconscious movements that are more part of that a non-pyramidal tract system. So today's goal, of course, is to get us to complete chapter 16 before we start chapter 17 tomorrow, but we'll start pretty much the same way. I'll draw some aspect of chapter 15, some aspect of chapter 16, and then because 17 is special senses, we'll begin to look at, say, how your eyes are different from your nose, are different from your ears. What would those sensory pathways look like? Dun dun bum bum. You're like, whatever, man. Exactly. Somatic motor pathways. Yet again, I'm starting out with that observation. I'm definitely having more fun than you guys are. Okay. So somatic motor pathways are nerves that extend out of the brainstem into the spinal cord, where the lower motor neuron is what's actually activating what's happening inside of your body. Okay. That should just make obvious sense. What we're going to do is we're going to look at local circuit neurons versus upper motor neurons.
Wait, can you go back to that previous slide again?
Sure.
Sorry, I just didn't read the last one.
Sure. Lower motor neurons innervate, which means, yeah, big fancy word there. Those are the neuromuscular junctions. That's what innervation means. Okay, so the end, the axon terminal of the lower motor neuron is that traveling into that neuromuscular junction. Okay?
Okay.
Cool.
Cool beans.
Good, fantastic. Unless, of course, I'm on my second cup of coffee, so if I'm going a little fast this morning, sorry about that.
I'm on my second cup as well.
Yeah, cool. Woohoo! Okay, so how do those pathways actually become activated, and then how is it that upper motor neuron will actually be regulated? So I'm not telling you how your brain is making the decision. I'm saying that this is how you regulate the output. Do not plan on memorizing this flow chart. Okay, if you follow these little lines, you'll be like, but wait, how do you actually get a decision to happen? Okay, Amy, do you feel like playing along? Fantastic, right? Amy, you're like, what is with these guys? Caleb, come on, Ryan, all you have to do is just stick your middle finger up. Was this your thought process? Or you're like, no, in real life, I'm going to flip you off the moment I see you.
Oh God, no. It's just I'm telling you, I turned 30. I don't care anymore.
This is good. You know, you're approaching the end of your life. How do you feel now?
So good.
Isn't
so
it?
much better than before.
It's sort of, you know, it's this moment when you're just like, I can do whatever I want. Well, not really, but imagine all of those processes are being regulated through these little red arrows. With me? Somehow you had some sensory input. It's like Caleb's being a wuss, Ryan was being a wuss. Actually, they were just being like, you know, it's Wednesday morning. I'm just chill. I don't want to play along today. So you got this input and you're like, yeah, I could do that. And you're like, yeah, I've got no problem putting my middle finger up like this. All these signals were now traveling one to the motor center inside your brainstem, telling the cerebellar neurons, if I lift my arm up, I'm going to switch my body weight a little bit, but not all that much. Your thalamus is like, yeah, I'm down for that. And now your motor output is going to say, upper motor neurons, let's say to the brain stem, yeah, we're going to do this. We're also going to send the local circuit neurons inside your spinal cord to finally activate that lower motor neuron. It's a lot more confusing than it seems like. You're just like, all I have to do is just go like this. But there's a lot of what's actually going on here.
So can I just try to
think through it? Be my guest.
So if I'm thinking about this, the way that I'm sort of getting it to visualize in my brain is that there's like a chunk that happens that is cerebral, and then a chunk that happens that's motor.
Okay.
And you need the cerebral part to happen before the motor part, which sounds very obvious, but it seems kind of like that, like there's a circuit in the brain before the body is involved.
Exactly. In fact, I would just simply put it as this: refinement. The basal nuclei and the cerebellum are being asked, hey, if we do this, are we prepared? Does our body know the difference between the middle finger, and the index finger, okay? Asking, okay, if we're going to do this, the middle finger versus the third finger in your hand. So these are the little decision-making processes that are way outside of our pay grade at this point in time, but that's actually what's happening, okay? And then once the answer comes back as yes, then we send signals from the upper motor neuron down to the lower circuit systems to activate the lower motor neuron, and then ultimately. And from your perspective, it's instantaneous. Okay? That's because the upper motor neuron and the lower motor neuron are both myelinated structures, which means this has to happen rather quickly. Exactly. Where things slow down, if you actually think about it, you know, maybe you've heard somebody say, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Okay, when you're actually learning how to do something, okay, you practice doing it slowly so that when you actually have to execute it, you can do it rapidly. By practicing that, the basal nuclei as well as the cerebellum have the ability then to learn which tract needs to be activated so that when you have to execute it rapidly, you can now execute it rapidly.
That sounds like learning music.
Exactly what it's like. It's actually, well, learning anything, right? But you practice reading the, citing the music first, then you maybe listen to the music second, and then you try to integrate all three of them while moving either your hands or your vocal cords or whatever it is you need to do. Okay? Make sense? Cool. So if that's actually what's going to happen, that's the tricky part here is reminding yourself to go back into your textbook and ask yourself, do I remember what that basal nuclei is doing? Remember, it's simply about no, I barely remember there's a basal nuclei inside my brain, right? But the idea, of course, is what all we're doing here is refining the request to actually have a skeletal muscle output. Let's get you out of the way here, put you over there, and move on. So the upper motor neuron is going to go to a direct motor pathway or an indirect motor pathway. And notice the distinction here. Wham, okay? The direct motor pathway delivers signals from the lower motor neuron from the cerebral cortex, wham. Indirect motor pathways will utilize input from the basal nuclei as well as the cerebellum and the cerebral cortex. Now, the reality is, as I just said, all of these pathways are actually happening simultaneously, but we teach them to you as though they're distinct from one another. Not true. So there are two direct motor pathways that you need to be aware of. The first is corticospinal pathway, so the cortex of the brain to the spinal column, and within that you have a lateral corticospinal tract and an anterior corticospinal tract, as well as a corticobulbar pathway, and we'll see how we use those, okay? And here's that cartoon inside your textbook, and if here's our lateral corticospinal pathway, essentially, notice we don't know what it's doing, but we're telling you it's arising from the primary motor area of the cerebral cortex, or the precentral gyrus. It's going to descend down the cerebral peduncles. Remember inside chapter 14, I said we were going to come back to these, and they're going to turn out to be important. Today is the day they're important. So the upper motor neuron travels through the cerebral peduncle, descends through the pons, and look, we're back at the pyramids. Dun, dun, bum, bum. And at our pyramids, the motor output decusses for the lateral corticospinal pathway. Descends through the red portion of the spinal cord. Remember, there is no red portion in your spinal cord. This is just the tract. And then it's going to synapse with the lower motor neuron in the spinal cord. And the way to think about it is this. The cell body of the lower motor neuron is located in the anterior gray horn of the spinal cord. Yeah, if that sounded really precise with all the correct adjectives in all the correct places, maybe you should pay attention to that. Where it's going to travel to, though, we really care about this piece. Lateral corticospinal pathway targets skeletal muscles in the distal parts of the limb. Amy, fuck you, man. Right? Okay, not that I really mean that or anything like that. She's like, you just recorded that. That's just so wrong, right? But notice, to actually move a distal portion of the skeletal muscle tissue, you used now that lateral cortical spinal pathway. With me? Okay, cool. Now, imagine, if you will, you have to shrug your shoulders. You're like, yeah, I don't really care. I don't care. Exactly. Those would be anterior cortical spinal pathways. Notice the cartoon pretty much starts in the same place. Whee! Okay, maybe a slightly different area in that premotor area of the cerebral cortex, otherwise known as the precentral gyrus, descends through the cerebral peduncles again. Notice what happens here. It travels directly through the pyramid. Okay, traveling down through the anterior cortical spinal tract, where it now travels to the anterior gray horn, synapsing with the lower part, the lower motor neuron here, to activate skeletal muscles in the trunk and proximal parts of the limbs. Okay, so the distinction between wiggling your toes and lifting your knee. Okay, wiggling your fingers, lifting your shoulders. Okay, now it's all integrated. So at some point in time, this would actually, imagine if you will, you're lifting your arm to lift your hand to wave your fingers. All of these things would happen sequentially. Okay, you're like, how am I ever going to remember it? You're going to remember to lift your shoulders, to lift your elbow, to lift your hand, to move your fingers. That's the way you remember it. Now there's also our corticobulbar pathway. And this is when things get a little bit weird, right? So corticobulbar pathway, take a look at what our targets are going to be here. We actually target two cranial nerves. In this case, facial expressions. This is when I say test and you guys all do what? Right? You're like, my life is so hard. Nobody cares. You're right. Nobody cares. Anyways, exactly. So all those facial expressions you're now struggling not to share because you know you're being recorded and the World Wide Web will see your facial expressions. At the same time, you can also regulate the movement of the hypoglossal targets, primarily the skeletal muscles of the tongue. Okay. Now we tie these together with indirect pathways. Now, indirect motor pathways, these would be the extrapyramidal. There's a series of names here: rubrospinal, tectospinal, vestibulospinal, reticulospinal, and medial-reticulospinal. Do not try to memorize all of these. Just make sure you know the definition of them, and you'll see what I mean in a second. Here's an example of an indirect motor pathway, and this is when all sorts of shit hits the fan. You've never seen this number of lines before in a cartoon, have you? Maybe the closest was like a reflex. Here's that superior colliculi, here's that red nuclei, right? Yes, no, maybe? When was the last time we saw that superior colliculi? Anybody? Remember, there was some visual stimulus that caused your eyes to move in a specific direction? By activating both pieces here, notice the vestibular nuclei is being moved as well, which means now your head is trying to figure out where you are relative in space and time. And there's that reticular formation. Something actually caught your attention. As you activate each of these pathways, maybe independently, maybe simultaneously, you activate these different tracks. And these different tracks will then cause a series of almost involuntary movements that are skeletal in nature. Okay? If we think about what this means in terms of, say, our balance, or if we think about this in terms of our attention, there's something that walks inside the room that a moment ago didn't capture your attention. Now it actually does, has activated the reticular formation, and now the reticular formation causes a series of muscular outputs to figure out what's going on there. And maybe, uh-oh, my internet is failing me here. Sorry, it says my internet connection is unstable.
Yeah, you're kind of breaking up on my end.
Sorry about that, guys. Blame whatever my carrier is. Maybe if we say goodbye, it'll be goodbye for the day, but hopefully not. Okay. So, like I said, try not to memorize all of these. Instead, try and look at the definitions, which you're going to see here. So if here are, well, here's homunculus man. Let's spend some time with homunculus person here, because we did yesterday. And notice You're in the pre-central gyrus again. So there's the post-central gyrus, pre-central gyrus in red. And this is all of, yeah, I'm sorry, Ryan?
Is there a table in the textbook that has the definitions that you want us
Of
to look
course.
at?
Yep,
All right.
we'll get there in a second. First, we're going to go
Okay.
through homunculus man because we did that yesterday, right? So this is the mapping of the myotomes of your body. You remember the dermatomes back inside chapter 13? So this is actually how you map which skeletal muscle output travels where. And again, similar to what we saw yesterday, your hands get the largest amount of musculature innervations. And then, of course, there's your entire face. The ability to actually create language in such a way that you can communicate with another human being creates a whole lot of neural inputs, okay? Notice what vocalization actually carries here versus, say, swallowing and mastication. That's the largest amount of the musculature inside of your body, okay? So, Ryan, you were asking about those tables. Tables are at the end of the chapter, right? So here are the direct pathways. Here's the lateral corticospinal pathway, anterior corticospinal pathway, corticobulbar. Notice what you're actually looking at here is they provide input to lower motor nerves of the nuclei of, look at this, the cranial nerves. Wah, 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 wah. So you're actually regulating, exactly. Okay, cool. So this means that inside chapter 14, we figured out where the cell bodies were, and now you're thinking about what the motor output for those cranial nerves would actually be. Here are the names, I would say the definitions of each of the pathways. So here's their function, and that's what we mean by the definition. Okay, so cerebrospinal conveys nerve impulses for the contralateral skeletal muscles, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now, I'm you, and I'm getting ready for the 4th exam. This is your lowest priority of information. It's nice to know them for your final exam. This is literally where I will start to review them, though, because I want to make sure you're aware that if you see the name, rubro-tecto-vestibulo-lateral and medial reticulospinal pathways, what you need to know is immediately you're in an extrapyramidal pathway. Not that it's contralateral or ipsilateral or maintaining posture, yada, yada, yada. Okay. What the hell does your cerebellum actually do? Okay, so remember, I introduced this to you way back in 13 and 14, right? Where it's monitoring the intention for movement, it's monitoring the actual movements as they're happening. Okay, well, that's actually kind of amazing, which is why you actually need all those gray folia outside of the arbor vitae, okay? And it's comparing the command signals to the actual sensory input. Okay, who here's ever practiced getting pulled over by the police and doing a sobriety test? Anybody? Nobody? Fantastic. We have one taker. Sophia's like, I have, but I'm never going to tell you I have, right? Yeah. So, you sit there while you're sober and you're like, okay, I can close my eyes. And maybe you're going to try this right now with me. Close your eyes and try and touch the tip of your nose. Go ahead, everybody. Just try. Like, no problem at all. Now, what's the problem with that? She's like, Amy's like, look, I can do both. No problem. I can stand on one foot. But what's the problem?
We're not drunk.
You're not drunk. Okay? No, so this is going to sound kind of weird. And please do not practice this at home. Try to stay away from the police at all costs. Okay? Do not go out and drink and drive. That's not what I'm saying you're going to do. The point is, if you're asking your brain to compare something, you need to compare it at the time of the example, right? So when students ask me, how do you get ready for a test when you only have an hour and 30 minutes? Well, you practice stressful test taking for an hour and 30 minutes. That's the only way to get good at it. It is, unfortunately, right? So the same thing happens with your cerebellum. When you're literally practicing for a performance, remember the practice is where all of the hard work is done. The actual execution should seem easy, and that's because the cerebellum has actually compared the signals to the sensory input. And it still has the ability then to send out corrective feedback, especially if you've practiced enough. You can immediately.
Is that how like muscle memory works, kind of?
Well, the input piece for the muscle memory would be that moment. Do you play tennis?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you know when you actually hit the sweet spot of your racket, right? It has a specific feel to it. You've actually pushed the most force through the ball. It actually has a unique sound to it. All of that is what you try to remember each time you hit the ball. Every time you fuck it up, your cerebellum now sends out a corrective signal to say, oh, you know, switch from an Eastern grip to a Western grip and try it differently. Yes, no, maybe, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But the muscle memory piece, Ryan, is you remember how to do it the next time you play.
Got it.
Okay?
Okay.
Cool. So how does this all happen? Way above our pay grade. But this is essentially, that is that first cartoon where you actually have the corrective signals traveling back to the motor systems, the motor centers of the brainstem. And what's going to happen here is you're going to see the signal then travels from the thalamus back to the sensory cortex. And then there's always this sort of piece that I try to say that magic happens here. I don't mean magic as in like, ooh, ethereal magic. Remember, the associative, commissural, and projection fibers are now sending information to different locations inside of the brain, so you can now respond. Okay? Wham. How do you tie all this shit together? You're about to get a lecture on sleep. Who's been sleeping for the last 4 weeks? Anybody? You're getting some sleep? Good. Who's staying awake to all hours of the night to try and read every single paragraph inside their textbook? No, no, no. It's like, I'm 30. It's not that important anymore. Right? Okay, cool. Right. But the idea, of course, is that for you to actually consolidate all of these thoughts, you actually need sleep, and you need to get into REM sleep to actually get that. What you don't want to find yourself is at the end of the semester in a coma state. Okay? Where, exactly, I don't mean you're unconscious and with an individual who has little or no response to stimuli, but you're so tired that your brain doesn't know how to process information any longer. You've all seen cinematic representations of individuals in coma. Has anybody ever seen a medically induced coma? Fantastic, right? So you see that there's essentially no motor output at all, which means what's actually happening is both sensory input and motor output are disentangled from one another, and therefore there's no activation of that reticular activating system, and therefore there's no response to stimuli. Okay, so you figure out which dosage of what drug would actually cause that for that individual patient. How we actually tie it all together, of course, is that language is used. So how many times, let me just ask this, because I never want a biased response. What do you guys do when you see a word inside your textbook that you don't know?
Google.
Do you, that's a great answer, Sophia. Do you always Google all of the words you don't know?
No, sometimes I just reread the sentence and try to understand.
From context. Awesome, right? So notice those sensory association areas, your brain is trying to figure out a word that's similar to it, right? So your brain literally works on this concept of analogy for understanding. So anytime you actually hear a word that you don't understand, or you try to pronounce a word you don't understand, you have an immediate learning opportunity. Fantastic. In the short term, it stays there. But every time you skip over the word, it never gets sent to your long-term memory. So therefore, you never know what it is. So what happens when you see it on a test? Go ahead, say Google again.
No, I'm like, oh, that's the word I couldn't say.
Yeah. And then you're like, shit, I don't know what this question's asking.
I don't remember what it is, though.
So all I'm trying to do is say, look, this is actually how your brain integrates small pieces of information, ties the systems together such that This is how you reinforce a sensory moment. That's all it is, okay? Disorders, of course, obviously Parkinson's disease, too little dopamine is produced. What happens, of course, is you end up with these tremor-like states. Most therapeutics these days are looking at how do you regenerate that dopamine production, and then how do you offset what's actually happening with the physical abnormality piece to it. And voila, this is where I stole these slides from. It's from your textbook. Woo-hoo. Yay. Chapter 16 is completed. How do you guys feel?
I think
Like
I
that
like
we-
this chapter.
You do or you don't?
I do.
Yeah. And so we're thinking about what next week is going to look like when we so Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday. The first one is just dissection of like rat, pig, whatever. But the next lab is here are all the bones in the skeletal system. So you want to figure out a way to quickly learn them. I would practice what you're learning inside chapter 16 while you're actually learning the bones. Okay? We'll talk about which
Professor?
pathway you're actually using. Ryan, what do you want?
So next week we're only going to come in like twice, right?
You
Like,
got it.
and are we doing a practical on each day?
No, not at all. The practical's on Fridays, Friday morning.
And it's only one practical, right?
For that week, yeah.
Are we doing another week of lab after that, or is next?
Yeah, we
week?
got 2 weeks, dude. Have you not read the syllabus yet?
No, I have. I just was trying to, I don't know, put it all together. Because when's the final exam? It's on the 14th.
Yeah, I'm giving you guys that same thing, Saturday or Sunday to take it. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
I mean, I could make it one practical that Friday the 14th. I don't think that's a good idea though. Exactly.
No, I'm not advocating for that.
And I'd probably say no to that. I'd be like, do you realize what we're going to do here? We're going to cram 10 labs into 4 lab sessions, and somehow you have to have access to it inside your brain. Okay.
So the final's going to be online too?
Well, we did that in the springtime, right? And it definitely works. I think if the college is open, I might have to give you guys the option. And notice I said if the college is open. Let's see what happens in the next 2 weeks. Okay?
Okay.
It's like, that's not an answer. Well, we don't know. Yeah, the college could close next Wednesday, right? So.
But it's supposed to be in person, the final.
Yeah, I'm planning for both possibilities. The thing is, I can't have 20 of you guys inside the same room at the same time. So we have to find rooms to put you in between now and then. Meanwhile, the rest of you are like, shit, I'm not going to have a computer at my disposal. That's horrible. Okay. Yeah, do you guys have any questions of me? What I'm doing this week is I'm putting together lab prep packets together for you guys. So this is what you should do before you come to lab on Monday or Tuesday. What you need to do before you come to lab on Tuesday or Thursday. And then there's a review component. Make sure you know what to do for the practical.
So the practical is online, or?
It will be online, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so everything you see inside lab, I'm taking pictures of. I convert that into, a PowerPoint presentation, and then we just walk through it.
Huh.
Can I just point out something? I mean, I don't know if it was just me, but last semester when I took this class,
Yeah.
I thought with some of the practicals that I was just a little bit confused about where you are actually like what you were pointing to with the arrow. Is there
Sure.
any way you might be just a little bit more
Precise?
definitive? Yeah.
Keep dreaming, pal.
All right. I'll go to
Hey,
bed.
Ryan, this needle's pointing at this muscle here. Tell me the name of this muscle. Sure, of course. Obviously I'll try to make it as precise as possible.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
no
you.
problem.
The videos that you have on YouTube, like the
Yeah.
practical review, are those helpful?
I would say they're very helpful.
Okay, I think I'll look at that
Kick ass. The one that's not on there will be the first one. Like, here's a dissection of a rat, or here's a dissection of a pig, sort of thing. But I'll put one of those together on Monday or Tuesday of next week to make sure that goes up there for you guys for your practical. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, because the other stuff, the nervous system, musculature, and skeletal system, that's difficult to learn in one day.
Hmm.
You're like, yeah, you're right. It's 206 bones, one day. What? You can do it. I know you can. I have faith in my ability to make sure it's all crammed into your cranium somehow.
It's somehow getting there. I don't know how, but it's getting there.
Okay. If you have any other questions, don't be afraid to email me. I'm you. You're finishing 16 before I see you tomorrow. Oh, it's Pretty Doggy. Oh. Sorry, I got distracted. My reticular activating system was
going for
activated
a
by a
walk.
four-legged animal. Woohoo! Is that your dog, Ryan?
That's my parents' lab. Yeah.
Oh, it's pretty.
Yeah. Jetty.
Jetty. Okay. Doesn't like
They're
the
cute.
jet. Okay.
JET, like the jetty on the beach.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, have a wonderful day. Stay out of trouble. Try not to do any harm to anybody. Make sure you learn something before I see you tomorrow.
That's it? We're done?
We're done. Chapter 16's done. I'm not
All right.
starting 17 with you guys today. You haven't read 16 yet. I'm not convinced you've read 15 yet.
All right.
Just because I'm talking doesn't mean you guys are learning. You need to go back and now do the reading.
All right. Thanks,
Okay, yeah.
Professor. I guess we'll see you in the morning.
Like it or not, be safe.
All right.
Au revoir.
You too.